Adjoa was the crown jewel of the Mensah family. Raised in the lap of luxury as the only daughter of one of the wealthiest families in Akua, she lived in a sprawling penthouse that boasted panoramic views of the city. Her father, Mr. Mensah, was a respected business tycoon, and her mother, Mrs. Mensah, was a former beauty queen known for hosting the finest social gatherings. Surrounded by house staff that catered to her every whim, Adjoa had never learned the value of hard work. Her brothers were groomed to take over the family empire, but Adjoa was expected to marry well, remain beautiful, and maintain the family's pristine reputation. With maids, drivers, and cooks tending to her every need, Adjoa had no responsibilities, and she liked it that way. But life took an unexpected turn when she met Kwame, a self-made millionaire from a modest background. Unlike Adjoa, Kwame had clawed his way to the top. They met at a glamorous charity gala, where Adjoa's beauty captivated him instantly. He was confident, intelligent, and successful, everything Adjoa could have hoped for in a partner. They married in a lavish wedding that was the talk of Akua, sparing no expense. But beneath the glitz and glamour, their worlds were about to collide. The honeymoon was over. Soon after their wedding, Kwame began to realize that Adjoa was entirely dependent on the household staff. She spent her days shopping in the city's upscale markets, scrolling through her phone, or having brunch with her friends. Meanwhile, Kwame, used to a life of self-sufficiency, worked long hours and came home expecting to find some semblance of normalcy. But there was none. Adjoa didn't cook, clean, or even know how to manage their home. The tension grew. Kwame would come home to a spotless penthouse, cleaned by staff, with meals cooked by their professional chef, Akua, but something was missing. He wanted Adjoa to make an effort. He wanted a partner, not just a trophy wife. One evening, Kwame made a small request. "Adjoa, can you warm up the stew I made last night? I'll be home late tomorrow, and I'd love to have it for dinner." Adjoa agreed, barely paying attention. But the next day, she completely forgot. She spent the afternoon shopping and lounging, and it wasn't until an hour before Kwame was due home that she remembered the soup. Panicked, she rushed to the kitchen, only to find the soup had spoiled. Desperate to salvage the situation, she grabbed honey and sugar from the pantry and poured them into the pot, hoping the sweetness would mask the bitterness. When Kwame arrived, the first thing he noticed was the strange, sweet smell in the air. His stomach churned. He walked into the kitchen, and there stood Adjoa, nervously stirring the pot. "What is that smell?" Kwame asked, lifting the lid. The stew was a syrupy mess. He looked at Adjoa in disbelief. "What did you do?" I thought I could fix it," Adjoa stammered. "I added honey and sugar to balance it out." Kwame's frustration boiled over. "Honey and sugar? Adjoa, this isn't some dessert. It's soup. I don't need you to fix everything, I just need you to try." Tears welled up in Adjoa's eyes. "I'm sorry. I'll do better. I'll make it right." The next day, Kofi, Adjoa's eldest brother, came to visit the penthouse. Sensing tension between Adjoa and Kwame, Kofi pulled Kwame aside during dinner. "You know, Adjoa isn't like us," Kofi said, his voice firm. "She wasn't raised to handle pressure. Be patient with her. You can't expect her to be like you overnight." Kwame, frustrated, responded. "I know she's capable of more. She can't keep relying on everyone around her. She needs to learn to stand on her own." Kofi, always protective of his sister, was skeptical. "She's not used to this, Kwame. Don't push her too hard. She's trying." But despite Kofi's warnings, Kwame believed Adjoa could rise to the challenge. However, their conversation left Adjoa feeling torn between her family's expectations and Kwame's. Determined to prove her worth, Adjoa vowed to learn how to cook. She started sneaking into the kitchen late at night, watching YouTube tutorials, burning dishes, and practicing in secret. But as she struggled with her newfound responsibilities, she couldn't help but notice the growing closeness between Kwame and Akua, the family's chef. Akua was in her mid-30s, with a calm demeanor and years of culinary expertise. Kwame frequently praised her cooking, often staying in the kitchen to chat while she prepared meals. And the more he complimented her, the more Adjoa seethed with jealousy. One evening, Adjoa entered the kitchen to find Kwame and Akua laughing together. Akua had just prepared his favorite dish, and he was beaming with approval. Adjoa's heart sank as she watched from the doorway. She wasn't just competing with a professional cook, she was competing for her husband's attention. "Do you like her?" she asked Kwame that night, her voice shaking. "Adjoa, don't be ridiculous. Akua is our cook." But Adjoa wasn't convinced. Jealousy festered as she felt sidelined in her own home. As Adjoa struggled with her role as Kwame's wife, her youngest brother, Ya, arrived at the penthouse one afternoon with friends. They expected to be pampered, asking for drinks and food, and lounging around while Adjoa worked on a new recipe she was determined to get right. "I'm not your maid, Ya," Adjoa snapped after Ya demanded she bring him a drink. Her frustration boiled over. Ya laughed, clearly amused. "Look at you, Adjoa. You're playing housewife now? What's next, are you going to start ironing Kwame's shirts?" His arrogance mirrored the old Adjoa. Her anger flared. "I've changed, Ya. Maybe you should try it sometime." Ya's taunts brought back memories of the life she had once cherished, one of ease, of never having to try. But now, her desire to prove herself outweighed her resentment of change. The pressure to change wasn't only coming from Kwame. One afternoon, while Adjoa was practicing a new recipe, her mother, Mrs. Mensah, stopped by for an impromptu visit. As she entered the kitchen, she raised an eyebrow at the sight of Adjoa chopping vegetables. "Darling, why are you doing this?" Mrs. Mensah asked, gliding into the kitchen and inspecting the ingredients on the counter. "You don't need to cook when you can hire the best. You're above this." Adjoa, wiping her hands on a towel, sighed. "Mom, Kwame believes in me. I need to prove that I can handle more than just sitting around. I want to try." Mrs. Mensah shook her head in disapproval. "You're my daughter, Adjoa. You're meant for a life of luxury. You're a queen, not a chef." But Adjoa's determination was unwavering. "I'm doing this for me, Mom. I need to know I can stand on my own." Adjoa's insecurities deepened. She was convinced that Akua was trying to steal Kwame's affections. And to make matters worse, she overheard Akua speaking softly to Kwame one afternoon while she was supposed to be upstairs. "You deserve someone who truly understands you," Akua said, her voice low. "Someone who knows how to take care of you." Adjoa's blood ran cold. That evening, after Akua had gone home, Adjoa exploded. "I heard what she said," she shouted, storming into the living room. "She thinks she's better for you than I am." Kwame, taken aback, tried to calm her down. "What are you talking about?" Akua. "She's trying to replace me. I won't let her." Adjoa, "That's absurd." "No, it's not. She's always here, cooking for you, talking to you, smiling at you, how could I not see it before?" Kwame shook his head, his patience running thin. "This is about you, Adjoa. Not Akua. You're jealous because you won't take responsibility for anything." Adjoa's heart shattered. The words stung, but she knew there was truth to them. She had to act. Kwame offered, "If it will make you feel better, I'll ask Akua to take some time off." Determined not to lose her husband, Adjoa took matters into her own hands. She redoubled her efforts to learn how to cook and run the household. She began practicing every day, perfecting her skills in the kitchen while managing the staff and taking charge of the penthouse. For the first time in her life, Adjoa was in control. It was Kwame's birthday, and Adjoa wanted to surprise him. She spent hours preparing his favorite dish, the same one Akua had made for him so many times before. But this time, it was all her doing. When Kwame arrived home that evening, he was shocked to find the table set for two. The air was filled with the mouth-watering aroma of perfectly cooked stew. Adjoa stood nervously by the stove, wiping her hands on a dishcloth. "You did this?" Kwame asked, disbelief in his voice. "I did," Adjoa replied, her heart pounding. Kwame sat down, took a bite, and his eyes widened. The stew was perfect. This is incredible, he said, looking up at Adjoa with a mixture of surprise and pride. Adjoa smiled, finally feeling like she had earned her place. Her father, Mr. Mensah, and her brothers, Kofi and Kojo, joined for the birthday dinner, and the pride in Mr. Mensah's eyes was unmistakable. You've done well, Adjoa, he said, a rare compliment from the usually stern businessman. Kojo added with a grin, told you had this all along. Even Kofi, who had been skeptical of Kwame's expectations, smiled approvingly. I underestimated you, he admitted, raising his glass in a toast to his sister. You've really grown. For the first time, Adjoa felt the weight of their approval and respect. She had stepped out of the shadow of her family's wealth and proved her capability. Kwame, too, looked at her with renewed admiration, seeing her not just as his wife but as his equal. But old habits die hard. One evening, Adjoa was hosting an upscale dinner for Kwame's business associates. It was an important night, and Adjoa had spent hours preparing. She had even enlisted the help of a private chef, just to ensure everything went smoothly. As the night unfolded, Adjoa found herself basking in compliments. The guests marveled at the luxurious decor, the impeccable food, and her poise as the hostess. For a moment, she felt like the young woman she once was, untouchable, admired, and perfect. But during the dinner, a familiar face showed up unexpectedly. It was Akua. She was a guest of one of Kwame's associates, now working for one of Kwame's rivals. Her entrance was unplanned, and when their eyes met across the room, the tension between them reignited. Adjoa's hands gripped the wineglass tightly as she watched Akua greet Kwame. The two exchanged polite smiles, but the moment was suffused with unspoken words. Akua glanced at Adjoa, a slight smirk on her lips as if to say, I'm still here. You haven't won. Adjoa felt a familiar surge of insecurity creeping in. For the rest of the evening, she couldn't help but notice Akua's presence, her confidence, and the way she still seemed to carry herself like she belonged. What is she doing here? Adjoa whispered to Kwame, her voice tight. Kwame glanced at Akua, his expression unreadable. She's just a guest tonight. Don't worry. But Adjoa couldn't help but notice how Akua carried herself, how she moved through the room like she still had power over the household. Throughout the evening, Akua exchanged polite pleasantries with Kwame, and though nothing inappropriate was said, Adjoa's jealousy and insecurity bubbled up. It didn't take long for Adjoa's suspicions to prove correct. Akua, now working closely with Kwame's business rival, had been feeding them inside information about Kwame's contracts. She used her knowledge from her time working in the Mensah household to sabotage Kwame's business. Leaking sensitive details about upcoming deals, Akua was determined to take down Kwame and reclaim her status as the woman who could run his life better than Adjoa ever could. When Kwame discovered the betrayal, he was furious. But more than that, he was hurt. He had trusted Akua as a member of their household, and her actions cut deeply. We trusted her, Kwame said, pacing their living room. She knew everything about us, our schedules, our plans. How could she do this? Adjoa, while hurt by Akua's actions, saw it as an opportunity. This wasn't just a business blow, it was personal. The woman she once saw as a rival had tried to dismantle everything they had built. But instead of crumbling under the weight of the revelation, Adjoa seized the moment. We're going to expose her, Adjoa said firmly, determination lighting her eyes. Kwame, initially unsure of how to proceed, trusted her judgment. Together, they devised a plan to not only expose Akua's betrayal but to take down the rival company that had conspired with her. Adjoa's connections in Akra's elite proved invaluable. Over the years, she had cultivated relationships with influential figures, politicians, business moguls, and media powerhouses. Now, she would use those connections like never before. During a meeting with one of her oldest family friends, a well-known investor with ties to the rival company, Adjoa let slip that Kwame was working on a lucrative new business deal that could shift the balance of power in the industry. It was bait, and she knew Akua would pass the information to her new employers. Akua will leak the information to the rival company, Adjoa explained to Kwame. And when they try to strike, we'll be ready. It was a dangerous gamble. If the plan failed, Kwame's business could suffer a massive loss. But Adjoa was confident. She had learned more than just cooking, she had learned how to maneuver in high-stakes business. Just as Adjoa had predicted, the information she accidentally leaked made its way to Akua. Within days, Kwame's rival attempted to undercut his deal. But they were walking right into Adjoa's trap. With the help of trusted journalists and business allies, Adjoa and Kwame exposed the rival company's underhanded tactics and Akua's role in the betrayal. The headlines broke, prominent business rival accused of corporate espionage, insider betrayal revealed. The media firestorm was immediate. Journalists swarmed the rival company's headquarters, and the scandal rocked the business world in Akua. Akua's role in the plot was laid bare for all to see. She had aligned herself with a company now crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny. Akua had once thought she could outsmart Adjoa, but she had underestimated the strength and intelligence of the woman she once viewed as weak. Kwame's reputation was restored, and his rivals were left scrambling to salvage what little they could. Akua, once confident and respected, became a disgraced figure in Akua's elite circles. The woman who had walked through the halls of Kwame and Adjoa's penthouse with an air of superiority was now shunned, her name tarnished by betrayal. "I didn't know you had this in you," Kwame said to Adjoa, overwhelmed with pride. "You didn't just save me, you saved us." Adjoa, having orchestrated the entire takedown, smiled. "I wasn't going to let her take what we've built." In the aftermath of the scandal, Adjoa and Kwame stood together on the balcony of their penthouse, looking out over the city they had both fought to protect. The air was cool, and the lights of Akua twinkled like stars below them. Kwame pulled Adjoa into his arms. "You've grown so much, Adjoa. I'm proud of you." For the first time, Adjoa felt the weight of her transformation. She wasn't just the spoiled girl from a wealthy family anymore. She had proven her strength, her intelligence, and her resilience. She had stepped out of the shadow of her upbringing and into a new role as Kwame's partner, his equal. Like a rose that grew from concrete, she had blossomed, even in the harshest of conditions. Their love had been tested by betrayal, family expectations, and the weight of their shared ambitions. But in the end, they found that the greatest strength came from growing together, stronger and more unbreakable than ever before. As Adjoa and Kwame stood together on the balcony, gazing out at the dazzling lights of Akua, it seemed like their troubles were behind them. But was this truly the end of their struggles, or just the beginning of a new chapter? With Akua's betrayal exposed and their relationship stronger than ever, what new challenges will arise? Will their love continue to flourish in the face of the pressures of wealth, power, and the public eye? And could someone from Kwame's past, or perhaps from Adjoa's, return to test their loyalty once again? Stay tuned for part 2 of Behind the Glamour, Adjoa's journey through betrayal and motherhood, where new conflicts emerge, alliances shift, and Adjoa and Kwame face even greater trials. Will their bond continue to grow, or will the weight of new challenges threaten to tear them apart? Subscribe to African Tales with Kwaku and Akua to find out what happens next. What happens when the life you've always known, the luxury, the glamour, the perfect marriage, begins to unravel at the seams? For Adjoa, betrayal was just the beginning. Now, she faces the ultimate challenge, the pressure to become a mother, the burden of expectations, and the silent battles no one sees. Behind the glitz and wealth lies a story of heartbreak, family secrets, and the crushing weight of infertility. As her world collapses, will Adjoa rise or be broken? The truth will leave you breathless. After Akua's betrayal, Adjoa and Kwame had emerged stronger as a couple. The manipulation, jealousy, and deceit they had endured could have broken them, but instead, it forged them into a more united pair. For months, they savored the peace that followed the storm. The tension that had once consumed their marriage gave way to a serene rhythm, one where they found comfort in their daily routines and each other. Adjoa had stepped up, managing their luxurious household with an efficiency and confidence that surprised even herself. Kwame, too, felt the change. No longer was he carrying the burden of their life alone. Adjoa stood by his side, not just as a wife but as a partner in every sense. Together, they worked on expanding his business, her taking on new roles that supported his vision. But as the months passed, a new challenge loomed, one that neither of them could have anticipated. Despite their growing strength as a couple, there was a growing emptiness that neither could ignore: the absence of a child. Adjoa had always imagined that motherhood would come naturally. Growing up, she watched her cousins and friends start families with ease. It seemed like a rite of passage, something that would inevitably follow once she and Kwame were settled. She pictured herself holding a child, rocking them to sleep in the grand nursery they had already started to plan. She imagined the smiles of her family as they welcomed the next generation of the Mensa legacy. But as the months stretched into a year, with no sign of pregnancy, Adjoa's certainty began to waver. She tried to remain optimistic, reminding herself that it sometimes took time. But the pressure was everywhere, in the well-meaning comments of friends and family, in the expectant looks of acquaintances, and most of all, in her own heart. At every family gathering, her mother, Mrs. Mensa, would gently ask, "When will we have our first grandchild, Adjoa? The family needs its next generation." What had once been harmless, playful comments from her brothers about joining them in the joys of parenthood now felt like daggers, piercing deeper each time they were uttered. During brunches with her friends, Adjoa found herself surrounded by women with children, their conversations dominated by stories of sleepless nights, first steps, and school admissions. Joy, one of her closest friends, had invited her to a lavish baby shower. There, amidst the laughter and celebration, Adjoa sat quietly, feeling the weight of her own unfulfilled longing. The joy that radiated from the expectant mothers around her only intensified her growing sense of isolation. At another brunch, her cousin, Nancy, casually remarked, "Well, the secret is pineapple and ginger tea. It works wonders." Others chimed in with their advice. "Yams are known to boost fertility," said another cousin with a knowing smile. They laughed lightly, but Adjoa felt the pressure tighten around her like a noose. Inside, Adjoa was drowning. Each negative pregnancy test was a blow to her self-esteem, chipping away at the woman she once was. Her beauty, her status, her success in running the household, all of it seemed meaningless in the face of her inability to conceive. She often wondered, in the dark hours of the night, if she was somehow broken, if her body was failing her. She began to retreat into herself, avoiding the brunches and social events she once loved. She no longer scrolled through social media, where every other post seemed to be an announcement of pregnancy or a picture-perfect family moment. It was too painful. One evening, after a particularly trying day, Adjoa broke down in front of Kwame. "What if I can't give you a child?" she sobbed, her voice trembling. "What if I can't do the one thing that everyone expects of me?" Kwame, ever her rock, pulled her into his arms, whispering softly, "Adjoa, you are enough. We are enough. No matter what happens, I love you. We'll figure this out together." But despite his reassurances, the weight of her struggle with infertility bore down on her every day, like an invisible anchor dragging her deeper into despair. The pressure Adjoa felt didn't just come from society or her social circles, it came from her own family. Mrs. Mensa, though she adored her daughter, had traditional views of a woman's role. To her, motherhood was the ultimate achievement for any woman, and the continuation of the Mensa family line was of utmost importance. "Darling, you've done so well in your marriage, and Kwame's business is flourishing," Mrs. Mensa would say during one of her frequent visits. "But a home is not complete without children. Your brothers have given us so many grandchildren, what's keeping you?" These conversations left Adjoa feeling even more inadequate, as though she were failing not just herself but her entire family. Her father, Mr. Mensa, though quieter, would invite her over for family dinners, where her nieces and nephews played around the table. The subtle yet constant reminder of her childless state weighed on her like a burden she could not escape. But the pressure was most intense from Kwame's mother, Madame Rita. Kwame was her only surviving child after the tragic loss of her other two children, and she viewed him as the last hope for carrying on the family name. For Madame Rita, grandchildren were not just a desire, they were a necessity. Every time she visited, she would comment on Adjoa's appearance, as though inspecting her for signs of pregnancy. "You're looking well, but you should rest more, Adjoa. A child needs a healthy mother." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes held an unspoken demand: deliver a grandchild, or you're failing the family. Madame Rita's disapproval became even more evident as the months passed. She had once criticized Adjoa for her lack of domestic skills, but now her focus had shifted entirely to Adjoa's fertility. "Kwame needs an heir," she would say, her voice laced with urgency. "It's your duty, Adjoa." The tension between Adjoa and her mother-in-law grew with each passing day. Adjoa could feel the weight of expectation suffocating her, making her question her place in the family. She couldn't bear the thought of disappointing Kwame, but the pressure from Madame Rita made her feel as though time was running out. Kwame, however, never wavered in his support. He sensed the growing tension between his wife and his mother but did his best to shield Adjoa from it. He loved her fiercely, and while he too longed for a child, he never let that desire overshadow the love he had for his wife. "I married you for you, not for what you can give me," Kwame would remind her after every difficult conversation with his mother. "If we never have children, it won't change how I feel about you." Yet, even Kwame could not entirely escape the pressure. His mother's remarks gnawed at him, and there were moments when he silently questioned whether he, too, was to blame for their struggles. He even went so far as to visit a doctor, undergoing tests to ensure he wasn't the cause of their infertility. When the results came back clear, he shared the news with Adjoa, but the relief was short-lived. Despite his reassurances, Adjoa could not shake the fear that she was somehow letting Kwame down. She began to withdraw, not just from social events but from Kwame himself. The once intimate bond they shared started to fray under the strain, with Adjoa pulling away emotionally. But Kwame never gave up on her. After every argument, every tearful night, he would hold her close, whispering, "We'll get through this together." After a year of trying, Adjoa and Kwame decided to seek help. The decision wasn't easy. Fertility treatments were physically and emotionally draining, and the process was invasive. Yet, they both agreed that it was worth it if it meant starting the family they so desperately wanted. The treatments, however, were brutal. Hormonal injections left Adjoa's body sore and her emotions raw. Doctors' appointments became frequent, and the waiting was unbearable. Each cycle brought hope, only to be dashed when yet another test came back negative. Adjoa felt like a shell of her former self. She avoided seeing her friends, not wanting to answer the inevitable questions about when she and Kwame would finally have children. Even the simplest of tasks felt overwhelming as the weight of her infertility consumed her. Her friend Caroline, sensing that something was wrong, tried to reach out. "You've been so strong, Adjoa," Caroline said gently during one of their rare meetings. "But you don't have to go through this alone." Adjoa appreciated the sentiment, but even Caroline couldn't understand the depth of her pain. The toll on her body and spirit was immense, and though Kwame remained by her side, Adjoa often felt like she was fighting this battle alone. After what felt like an eternity of heartache and disappointment, Adjoa finally received the news she had longed for: she was pregnant. It felt like a miracle, a light piercing through the darkness of their struggles. The joy that erupted in their home was indescribable. Kwame lifted her in his arms, spinning her around, both of them laughing and crying with happiness. Adjoa's entire world seemed to brighten. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to dream of the future, their child's first steps, family vacations, and the nursery they would prepare together. The weight of her infertility battle seemed to lift overnight, replaced with an overwhelming sense of relief and hope. News of her pregnancy spread quickly among family and friends. Her mother, Mrs. Mensah, organized a lavish celebration to mark the occasion, complete with live music, gifts, and flowers. Everyone came: her brothers, their children, friends from all walks of life. Even Mr. Mensah, a man known for his reserved nature, beamed with pride. "You've made us proud, Adjoa," he said, giving her a rare, genuine smile. Madame Rita, Kwame's mother, was perhaps the most elated. She had wanted a grandchild for so long that she could barely contain her excitement. At every opportunity, she showered Adjoa with advice on pregnancy and motherhood, much of it laced with her own hopes for the continuation of the family line. "You're carrying the future of the Mensah name," she reminded Adjoa constantly. "You have to take care of yourself, for the baby's sake." But as the pregnancy progressed, things began to change. At around 6 months, Adjoa started to feel unwell. At first, she brushed it off as the normal discomforts of pregnancy. But the pains in her abdomen became sharper, more frequent, and something deep inside her told her that something was wrong. She didn't want to worry Kwame, so she kept quiet about the worst of her symptoms. But one night, the pain became unbearable. She woke up in a cold sweat, clutching her stomach in agony. Kwame, alarmed, rushed her to the hospital, his heart pounding with fear. The hours that followed were a blur of doctors, nurses, and worried glances exchanged between medical staff. Then came the devastating news: their baby was gone. Adjoa had suffered a stillbirth at 6 months. The world as they knew it collapsed around them. Everything they had hoped for, everything they had dreamed of, had been snatched away in an instant. The grief was suffocating. Adjoa felt as though her body had betrayed her, as though she had failed again in the most profound way imaginable. The days and weeks that followed were some of the darkest of Adjoa's life. Grief hung over their home like a storm cloud, relentless and oppressive. Adjoa could barely get out of bed, consumed by a sorrow so deep that it felt as though it might swallow her whole. But it wasn't just the grief of losing their child that weighed on her, it was the shame. Word of the stillbirth spread, and soon, whispers began to circulate within Akua's elite circles. The same people who had once celebrated her beauty and poise were now questioning her strength as a woman. "I heard she wasn't taking care of herself properly," someone whispered at a gathering. "Maybe she was too focused on maintaining her figure instead of the baby. Some women just aren't cut out for motherhood," another voice murmured. "Perhaps she's one of them." These comments, often said in hushed tones, reached Adjoa's ears. They sliced through her already fragile sense of self, amplifying her feelings of failure. Even some of her friends, though well-meaning, offered advice that stung. "You need to focus on your health now, Adjoa," they would say, their voices dripping with pity. "You'll have another chance." Kwame's mother, Madame Rita, though devastated by the loss of her grandchild, could not hide her disappointment. While she didn't openly blame Adjoa, her silent disapproval was palpable. "You must be strong," she told Adjoa during one visit, her voice tight with frustration. "The family still needs an heir." For Adjoa, Madame Rita's words were like salt in a fresh wound. The pressure to fulfill her role as the wife of Kwame, the last surviving male of his family, had never felt so heavy. Madame Rita, who had once tolerated Adjoa's shortcomings as a homemaker, now seemed to view this failure as unforgivable. Kwame, on the other hand, remained steadfast in his support. He never once blamed Adjoa for what had happened, despite the whispers and rumors that swirled around them. "This was not your fault," he told her, holding her close every night as she wept in his arms. "We will get through this, Adjoa. You're not alone in this." The weeks following the stillbirth were some of the darkest in their lives. Adjoa spiraled into a deep depression, unable to leave the house, unable to face the world. Every reminder of their loss, every baby picture, every toy they had bought in anticipation, was too much to bear. Kwame, too, struggled with his grief, but he tried to keep it together for Adjoa's sake. Yet, no matter how hard he tried to reach her, she seemed unreachable. She withdrew from him, from everyone, building walls around her pain. Their once strong marriage was crumbling under the weight of their loss. Adjoa's anger and frustration began to manifest in bitter fights. "You don't understand," she would scream during their arguments. "You'll never understand what it's like to carry a child and lose them." Kwame, desperate to fix what was broken, began working longer hours, throwing himself into his business. But his absence only deepened the divide between them. The loss of their child had created a chasm that neither of them knew how to bridge. As if their grief wasn't enough, an unexpected betrayal came from within their family. Adjoa's younger brother, Ya, who had always been the mischievous one, became entangled in a scandal that threatened to destroy the Mensa family's reputation. He had been caught in a high-profile affair with the wife of one of Kwame's business associates. The scandal rocked both the Mensa family and Kwame's business circles. Ya's affair wasn't just a personal betrayal, it had political and financial implications. Kwame's associate, a prominent businessman, was furious and threatened to sever ties with Kwame, holding him responsible for his brother-in-law's actions. Do you know what this could do to us? Kwame shouted during one of their increasingly frequent arguments. Your brother is going to ruin everything I've worked for. Adjoa, already in a fragile emotional state, tried to mediate between her husband and her brother, but it was a losing battle. Ya refused to take responsibility for his actions, dismissing the affair as a private matter. But Kwame wasn't willing to forgive so easily. I've lost business deals because of him. Our name is being dragged through the mud, Adjoa. How much more are we supposed to take? The strain on their marriage was now unbearable. Between their personal loss, Adjoa's family's scandal, and the ever-growing distance between them, it felt as though everything they had built together was falling apart. One evening, after yet another heated argument with Kwame about Ya's affair and the fallout it caused, Adjoa couldn't take it anymore. She stormed out of their penthouse and drove aimlessly through the city, tears streaming down her face. She felt trapped by grief, by societal expectations, by family drama, and by her own sense of inadequacy. She ended up at her parents' house, where she was met with disapproval rather than comfort. Her mother, Mrs. Mensah, had grown increasingly cold and distant since the loss of Adjoa's child, and now, with Ya's scandal, she seemed more concerned with appearances than with Adjoa's emotional well-being. You need to get yourself together, Adjoa, Mrs. Mensah said coldly. Our family's reputation is on the line. You can't afford to fall apart now. Adjoa felt completely alone. Even her family had turned against her. That night, for the first time, Adjoa began to question whether her marriage to Kwame could survive. She had fought so hard to prove her worth, to rise above her privileged upbringing and stand as Kwame's equal, but now, she wasn't sure if they could come back from this. The cracks in their relationship seemed too deep, too wide to mend. After months of grieving, Adjoa and Kwame decided to try again, but this time, they sought medical help. Fertility treatments were their new hope, though the process was anything but easy. Hormonal injections, endless tests, and invasive procedures became a part of their daily lives. The emotional toll of the treatments was immense, leaving Adjoa physically exhausted and mentally drained. She began to feel like her body was no longer her own, as though it had become a vessel for failure. But Kwame never wavered. He attended every appointment with her, held her hand through every painful procedure, and reminded her that they were in this together. He never let her feel like she was fighting this battle alone, even when the odds seemed stacked against them. After what felt like an eternity, Adjoa became pregnant again. The joy and relief that flooded their home were indescribable, but this time, Adjoa was more guarded. She was filled with a mixture of hope and fear, terrified of losing another child. As her body began to change, however, a new challenge arose: body shaming. The women of Akua's elite, who had once admired her slim figure and perfect appearance, began to make cruel remarks about her pregnancy weight. At first, it was subtle, well-meaning comments about how she was glowing. But as she gained more weight, the tone shifted. Are you sure you should be eating that, Adjoa? One of her so-called friends asked during a brunch. You don't want to get too big. It'll be hard to lose the weight after the baby. At a family gathering, her mother, Mrs. Mensah, was less tactful. Darling, you've put on quite a bit of weight, haven't you? Be careful, you don't want to let yourself go. A baby is no excuse for looking sloppy. One night, after a particularly rough dinner where Mrs. Mensah had all but shamed Adjoa in front of the entire family, Kwame confronted her. She's pregnant, not sick, Kwame snapped. And she doesn't need anyone, least of all her family, telling her how to look or how to carry herself. Mrs. Mensah, taken aback, tried to wave it off. I'm only looking out for her, Kwame. We're a high-profile family. Appearance matters. Not more than her health. Not more than her happiness, Kwame said firmly, standing up for Adjoa in a way that left no room for debate. You've gained so much weight, Adjoa, one woman whispered at a dinner party. I hardly recognized you. Others commented on her swollen feet, her rounder face, her changing body. Adjoa, already fragile from the trauma of her previous loss, struggled to cope with the constant judgment. Even in her own home, the staff would make subtle remarks about how much she was eating or how much weight she had gained. It felt like everyone was watching her, waiting for her to fail. Kwame, sensing her distress, did everything he could to reassure her. "You're beautiful, Adjoa," he told her every day. "You're growing our child. Don't listen to them." But the insecurities continued to mount. Adjoa no longer recognized herself, both physically and emotionally. The joy of pregnancy was overshadowed by her fear of another loss and the constant pressure to maintain her appearance. As the months passed, the strain of pregnancy and societal pressure began to take a toll on their marriage. Adjoa, once confident and self-assured, became withdrawn and irritable. She lashed out at Kwame over small things, frustrated by her own insecurities and fears. Kwame, already overwhelmed with the demands of his growing business, found it increasingly difficult to connect with his wife. He wanted to help her, to ease her pain, but he didn't know how. The distance between them grew, and for the first time since Akua's betrayal, Kwame feared that their marriage might not survive the weight of their struggles. One evening, after a particularly heated argument, Adjoa broke down. "I don't even recognize myself anymore," she sobbed. "I've lost who I am." Kwame pulled her close, his heart breaking for her. "We're in this together, Adjoa," he whispered. "I love you no matter what. We'll get through this. This is just a phase, it will pass." But Adjoa wasn't sure if she believed him. The weight of her insecurities felt too heavy to bear, and she wasn't sure if she could ever find her way back to the woman she used to be. As the months passed, Adjoa slowly began to rebuild herself. She found strength in the love she shared with Kwame, in the quiet moments they spent together, and in the realization that she was more than the expectations placed upon her. One evening, at yet another social event, Adjoa decided that she was done hiding her pain. She was done letting society's judgment dictate how she saw herself. Standing tall and regal in the center of the room, Adjoa raised her glass and spoke. "I know many of you have heard about what Kwame and I went through. I've heard the whispers, the rumors, the judgment. But let me be clear, I am not ashamed of what happened. I will not hide my grief, and I will not let anyone make me feel like I've failed." Her voice, strong and unwavering, echoed through the room. "We faced a devastating loss, but we are still standing. I am still standing. And I refuse to be defined by what others think of me or my body." Kwame, standing beside her, took her hand and squeezed it. The room was silent, but in that silence, Adjoa felt a shift. She had reclaimed her narrative. She was no longer just the woman who had it all, she was the woman who had faced unimaginable loss and still stood tall. Adjoa's bold declaration sent ripples through the room. The once judgmental stares softened, and the whispers ceased. For the first time, those who had seen her as fragile or incapable of facing hardship now saw her strength in full force. Her confidence, once rooted in her appearance and social status, had evolved into something far more profound. She was no longer concerned with fitting into society's narrow expectations, she had transcended them. In the weeks following her public stand, Adjoa continued to confront the challenges of her new reality. She and Kwame focused on healing together. Adjoa found herself drawn to causes that supported women dealing with infertility, miscarriage, body shaming, and stillbirth. She began volunteering with organizations that provided counseling and support for women experiencing these hardships, using her platform to bring awareness to the struggles many women face in silence. Through this, Adjoa found her purpose. She realized that her journey wasn't just about her own healing, but about using her story to uplift others. She shared her experience openly, writing articles, speaking at events, and becoming an advocate for body positivity and women's health. No longer the passive socialite, she was now a voice for those who had been silenced by shame and societal expectations. Adjoa's journey also led to a deeper connection with her family. The once superficial dynamics between her and her mother, Mrs. Mensah, began to shift. Mrs. Mensah, who had always pushed Adjoa to conform to expectations, saw the toll that these expectations had taken on her daughter. During one visit, as they sat together in the penthouse, her mother took Adjoa's hand and, for the first time, apologized. "I didn't realize how much pressure I was putting on you," Mrs. Mensah said, her voice soft with regret. "I wanted you to have everything, but I didn't stop to think about what you needed." Adjoa squeezed her mother's hand. I know you were only trying to protect me. But I need to live my life on my own terms. From that moment on, their relationship deepened. Mrs. Mensah, once focused on image and prestige, began to see the world through Adjoa's eyes. Their conversations became more genuine, and for the first time in her life, Adjoa felt truly understood by her mother. Her brothers, too, came to admire her strength. Kojo, who had once teased her about not being ready for motherhood, was now one of her biggest supporters, encouraging her work with women's organizations and standing by her as she navigated this new chapter in her life. Kofi, always the quiet observer, took pride in his sister's transformation, telling her that she had surpassed any expectation he had ever held for her. Kwame and Adjoa, a partnership redefined. Kwame and Adjoa's relationship continued to evolve. They had weathered the storm of infertility, societal pressure, and personal loss, and came out of it with a bond stronger than ever. The experiences they had shared over the years had turned them into true partners, each relying on the other's strength when their own faltered. Despite all the challenges, Adjoa carried her pregnancy to term and gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The moment she held him in her arms, all the pain, insecurity, and doubt seemed to melt away. Kwame stood by her side, tears in his eyes. "We did it, Adjoa," he whispered. "We're a family." In that moment, Adjoa felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The journey had been long and painful, but it had brought them closer together. They had faced the pressures of society, the strain of infertility, and even betrayal from within their family, but they had come out stronger on the other side. As they looked down at their newborn son, they knew that their journey was far from over. There would be new challenges, new trials to face. But as long as they had each other, they knew they could conquer anything. The journey of behind the glamour, Adjoa's journey through betrayal and motherhood, has taken Adjoa and Kwame through unimaginable challenges. From the heartache of infertility to the pain of loss, and through the harsh judgment of society, Adjoa has emerged stronger than ever. She's learned to stand tall, to embrace her identity beyond motherhood, and to redefine what it means to be a strong woman. What will the future hold for Adjoa and Kwame? Will they find peace and happiness? Or will new trials emerge to challenge their bond even further? Stay tuned for the next chapter of their story, where more surprises and challenges await in Behind the Glamour, Adjoa's journey through legacy and survival. Don't forget to subscribe to African Tales by Kwaku and Akua to follow Adjoa's journey and explore more captivating African stories filled with drama, twists, and heartwarming moments. Share your thoughts in the comments, and remember to hit the notification bell for updates.